Hey guys, Funsho here from We Coach Crypto, and today we are going to be joined by a very special guest. This is John from Shapeshift, who I've spoken to many times. When we were doing crypto cognition back on Clubhouse back in the day. But John, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. So what I wanted to do today is have a chat really to get some perspective from someone that's been in the industry for a long time, works in the industry, and just really find out what your outlook is on what's going on with the crypto market at the moment. Maybe cover briefly the Ethereum merge just because of all the hype that's around it. And also find out a little bit more about you and about Shapeshift as well, just so that people get a bit more of an understanding. So to start with, can you do a bit of an introduction? Just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what your experience is in the market.
So yeah, my name is John. I've been in Bitcoin since around 2011, 2012, when I first started getting really interested by it and kind of diving down the proverbial rabbit hole. And then in that became probably the most interesting thing in the world to me, and I spent many hours just kind of researching how Bitcoin worked and why it'd be interesting in buying some of my first Bitcoin back in that time, just getting interested in the ecosystem and what the problems that Bitcoin could potentially solve. And in 2013, I started working with Eric Voorhees on what eventually became Shapeshift, which we launched in 2014. I was co-founder and COO of Shapeshift for most of its time as an entity in the early days, and those who are getting into crypto now who may or may not have heard of Shapeshift. Back in the day, we were one of the easiest and one of the only ways to switch from one type of cryptocurrency or digital asset to another one very quickly and easily, and importantly, doing it in a non-custodial manner, meaning we never held customer funds. Shapeshift has evolved a lot over that time, and last year, about a bit over a year ago, back in July of last year, we announced that we were actually launching a DAO and sunsetting the corporate entity. So we actually decentralized away the corporate entity of Shapeshift, and what we did is we launched a DAO. So Shapeshift still exists today. This is what you're looking at when you look at this open source app up here, the app.shapeshift.com. This has actually been launched and run by the community that now runs Shapeshift. So the decentralized organization is now what Shapeshift is today, and is building this decentralized interface for all of crypto and across all of crypto assets. That's kind of Shapeshift's current project among a number of other things the DAO is working on. And you can go there and plug in your wallet and do anything that you want to do, for the most part in the crypto world, and it's improving all the time. But yeah, we really, after 8+ years of a company, we decided to decentralize and really lean into that ethos that we always kind of held at Shapeshift, and that's where we are today. And so my background was in founding that company, helping launch this DAO a year ago, and everything in between. It's hard to cover almost a decade of crypto time in a short intro, but that's where I come from.
With you. No, I'm with you, and it's crazy for me because not only have I been hosting shows that I've been talking on, that you've been talking on, but prior to even talking to you before, John, I was using Shapeshift, and I remember what it was like. And the advancement that we've seen with a lot of these applications, and Shapeshift in particular, is just crazy how quickly things are moving. And I think that kind of poignantly is a great place for us to kind of move on to continue our conversation. I wanted to get an idea from you, the advancement that we've seen over that last 10-year period. And if we sort of go down that typical route of every 10 years, there's a new advancement in technology, where do you think we're going through as a stage right now? Because obviously when Bitcoin first came out, it was, you know, this magic internet money that people didn't really understand, to where we are today, to where we're going in the future. I'd love to know what your kind of outlook is, and if there's anything that's really exciting you at the moment.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's plenty of things that excite me, but to kind of back up for a sec, you know, what we lovingly refer to as, you know, crypto time in the industry refers to the fact that things just move incredibly fast in the crypto industry. The pace of innovation is like, it's like the rest of the technology sector, but kind of on steroids. Everything just moves incredibly fast. It's really hard to keep up with, even if you spend, you know, all your full time working and researching and trying to keep abreast of what's happening in crypto. It's just moved so quick, and it wasn't always that way. When I first got into Bitcoin, you know, things were starting to move, you know, at a decent speed, but there was only really one crypto asset that anyone cared about, which was Bitcoin. There was only a small group of people that were using it or cared about it or trading it or any of those things. And it was just, you could keep up with everything going on in the industry just by, you know, reading a few news articles or looking at the front page of Our Bitcoin back in the day, and you could basically understand or have an idea of everything that was going on. And, you know, as you know, other assets started to launch, you know, after the launch of Shapeshift, and, you know, when Ethereum launched, and that started to proliferate a lot more other types of digital assets, and innovation in the space, that started to become impossible. I remember it was probably sometime back in like late 2016, probably early 2017, when I realized, okay, I can no longer keep up with everything. and I kind of had that as a source of pride back in the early days, that I could, like, I would spend enough time that I would generally have an idea of everything going on. You know, within limits. I'm sure there were things I weren't, but at a high level, I did. That definitely changed, especially in the 2017 bull run. So many projects started to pop up. You know, there were all these ICOs raising money. There was just so much stuff going on. You could not keep up anymore. And that's only accelerated. That did not, even after the things crashed in 2018, that didn't slow down, because people kept building. Crypto really entered, at least maybe not the mainstream, but at least the mainstream consciousness. People understood or like had heard of Bitcoin, and they had heard of Ethereum, and they had heard of these ICOs, even if they hadn't participated. And it just gotten so much bigger, and that brought a lot of new talent into the space. People that were excited about it and that were looking to be part of, you know, building something, and that started to do it. And, you know, one of these facets of decentralization that I really appreciate is that as things built out in multiple directions, it becomes harder and harder to keep track of it all, because there's so many teams and so many people building in so many different directions simultaneously. And that's part of the beauty of crypto, but it's also part of the overwhelming part of it, is that's only accelerated. And today that is really the case, where there's just so much going on in so many directions, and it has entered the mainstream a bit more. I wouldn't say we have anywhere near what I would call mainstream adoption, but we do have a pretty strong mainstream awareness. We actually have institutions that buy and hold Bitcoin and other crypto assets. That was something that was, you know, joked about for many years in Bitcoin, and it was always, the institutions are coming like every year since like 2014, and it was always a joke, because they never seemingly arrived, but they did arrive in 2020. So that really seemed to change how the markets acted and what we've seen in them since that time. But then you just have this building in every direction, and it's, you know, in terms of what excites me, it's all of that innovation. It's all of the decentralized innovation happening in so many different ways. DeFi in general, you know, I think has been one of the more exciting developments of crypto, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, since the DeFi summer, and just people actually building useful applications. I remember in 2017, there was all this hype, you know, prices were soaring. Everyone was so excited. Everyone was partying at various points at conferences, at all these various things. But the reality is there were very few, if any, useful crypto applications at that time. I mean, that was even pre-Uniswap. Uniswap kind of came out late 2017 and started to come about. Shapeshift might have been one of the most useful crypto applications at the time, but we weren't like a DeFi native application in the way that they started to get built. But then, by the time we hit 2019, 2020, we had actually seen the fruits of a lot of these labors of some of these teams that had been building since 2017. And that's when I think I first started realizing, like, wow, this time there's actually a number of useful things you can do with your crypto. You can take out a loan, you can join a liquidity pool, you can find other ways to earn yield, you can NFTs started being on the rise. There was just more interesting things you could actually do with it. And so I think that is really what's excited me over the last few years with the rise of DeFi, is just the usefulness. I personally, have gone to DeFi rather than banks when I've needed to, finance things in my life and things like that. And just, I can't, it's hard to communicate to someone how much easier and better that experience is once you understand it and actually get to use some of these things. So,
for sure.
The usefulness is probably the thing I'm most excited about, and I see that happening more and more. Even as we've entered this bear market over the last year, it hasn't made any of these applications any less useful, and they are building in every direction. And I fully believe that within a few years, it will that will outpace anything I can even imagine. That things are going to come out that we can't imagine, that as people actually build on these crypto rails and build things they couldn't build before, and it's going to lead to all sorts of useful applications that hopefully anyone can use, or anyone that's in the industry at least, and eventually far beyond that. That's really what excites me the most. There's a whole category of these things and plethora of interesting applications at this point, and again, it's just hard to keep track of. But that's super exciting to me, because you go back even 3 or 4 years and you could count on one hand the amount of useful applications in the space, and now it's innumerable.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. And what I love the most with how you've just answered that is actually all down to the fact of how long you've actually been in this space for, and what your knowledge level is, and the fact that you're someone that was involved building a platform that did something different too. And it's the fact that we know as a space, for it to continue to grow, for adoption to continue, if you haven't got something that people actually find useful, then this is just purely a gambling arena. Otherwise, everyone comes into crypto. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. A lot of people come to crypto because they think, I can make money, I can become a millionaire overnight. And it isn't until you actually spend some good quality time in this space, get to know the community, go and attend some events, and be around for a few years that you realize what an amazing environment it is that's being built here, and how much it is truly changing things for the better for the future of finance, and the way that we all interact with one another as well. And I think I'm just glad that I've had the opportunity to be a part of that. And it's just testament to the fact that you've been in this for many years, and what's excited you the most is the use cases that have come out of it. And that's cool to me. It really is. So I think that's a brilliant answer. And I think moving forward as well, it is really, and I know it's cliche, but it is the utility of these things that has to be at the forefront for it to continue to thrive. And I think it will continue to thrive. I don't think there's any stopping crypto, at this stage. I think there's a lot of hearsay, a lot of stuff that goes in the media that makes things sound negative. But when you look at any currency on the planet, fiat or crypto or whatever else, there's always going to be bad things that happen with any of these things that you use. what this is about is how we can enhance people's lives with the utility of what some of these projects can actually do. And I think the education's where it's lacking the most, John, is the fact that people don't really truly understand what you can do with a lot of these projects and why there's a massive benefit to them in using them in comparison to what they've always been used to using. And that takes time. It takes time for these people to get that. But I just can't believe the growth that I've seen. I mean, obviously, I've not been in the space as long as you. I mean, you're a veteran, but at the same time, for me, even looking at 2016, 2017, how many projects there are, and now we've got like over 20,000 on CoinMarketCap. It's mind-blowing to me. And yes, a large percentage of those might not make it or are unlikely to make it, but it's the fact that people are going out there and building and trying new things that I think is revolutionary. I did want to come on to
Agreed.
sort of the newer side of things as well, John. You know, like, okay, yes, DeFi, amazing, lending, staking, yield farming, so many different things that we can now do. But what are your thoughts about Web3, metaverse, different use cases for NFTs? Like, where do you think that's going in the future?
Yeah, I would say that, like, of those various use cases, that I think DeFi is the farthest along in actually, like, you know, the DeFi movement kind of started, you know, probably late, you know, late 2017 as part of the Ethereum boom, and then the fruits kind of came out.
Yeah,
2019, 2020 fueled the DeFi summer, and then that's probably the most farthest along on that utility track. And it's similar to you. I do agree that, like, you know, it's really the utility that ends up driving these things. If we didn't have utility in some of these things that we were building, if crypto wasn't inherently useful in various ways, you know, even just back to Bitcoin being useful as a means of store of value and transferring money around the world, you know, transferring value around the world.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have these resurgences. You know, we would have had one bubble,
Yeah.
and then there would have been a mania, and then it just, you know, the bear market would have came, it would have never come back. But it's a testament to the crypto industry as a whole that, like, it keeps coming back. You know, this is like, you know,
bigger
the fourth or fifth such cycle that I've seen. And the reason, what always underlies that is the fundamentals of these things getting better, more useful for more people. We're still somewhat early in that process in terms of historical terms, but it's clearly getting more and more useful, or that wouldn't happen. So I think DeFi has been the kind of banner holder of that usefulness. I think some of these other newer things, so Web3 to me is still kind of a little bit I think it's an interesting way of looking at the entire industry, and another way of reframing it. It's a little bit buzzwordy and marketing buzzwordy to me about what exactly is Web3. And, you know, I could ask 10 people in the industry and probably get at least 5 or 6 different answers about what exactly that means.
True.
I think it is a cool way to talk about the evolution of the web and where crypto fits in that, and how it particularly it particularly is an evolution around ownership of community-owned you know, projects and assets, and community, and the ability for users to actually own their data, own their assets in a way that Web 2 never allowed. I think that's kind of the interesting difference between Web 2 and Web 3, but it's such a broad term that I'm not sure how much to delve in there. I think with NFTs, this NFTs are really interesting, and one that a lot of people in crypto, including myself, did not necessarily see coming as big as it became over the last few years. Certainly we were aware of NFTs way back in 2017 when the crypto kitties famously clogged up all the Ethereum tubes for a while, and it made it very hard to use Ethereum for a number of weeks. And we had that problem at Shapeshift of, like, all of our, you know, customers were getting mad because all their exchanges were, you know, going slow or frozen on chain because nobody could get any blocks in, any transactions into a block because of the kitties. So, like, that was like the introduction to the industry, and then they kind of disappeared and no one really thought about them for a while. And I always thought NFTs would be useful and interesting over time, but I didn't expect that to be one of the things that kind of exploded more into the mainstream consciousness more than any other part of crypto. And then it really did in 2020. Like, it seemed like more people understood, had heard of an NFT and were talking about NFTs than people that even knew what Bitcoin and Ethereum was at that time. I think NFTs are still quite early in kind of their cycle of development and hype, though. I think we went through this cycle of hype around NFTs the last few years. Most of these NFTs were, kind of like early, tokens in the ICO days, mostly garbage that people got hyped about, and people traded with each other, and some people made a lot of money, so a lot of other people lost a lot of money, but they were just basically trading these images back and forth, and they didn't necessarily have much utility to them. And a lot of people will look at that and be like, well, NFTs are just garbage, just like people said about tokens in 2017. I don't think that's the long-term trajectory. I think many of the NFTs that came out over the last few years will not have a home. There will be some of the more well-known ones that will, gained enough of a narrative and story that they will persist. I don't think things like the CryptoPunks or the Bored Ape yachts are going anywhere anytime soon. Those will probably retain value, but a lot of the ones that are more, the larger amounts and the long tail of assets will probably not necessarily do well over the long term. Some of them will, but most of them won't, and that's okay. But what will happen is that more and more interesting use cases of NFTs will come about. Probably by the time we hit the next bull market, NFTs will be about at the stage that DeFi was in the last few years, in that it will actually start to become more useful. I think you'll see more interesting applications of it. Like I've seen particularly, like one of the things where I always thought NFTs would take off with was games, and we're seeing a lot more talk about that over the last few years. But it was so obvious to me, even 7 or 8 years ago, that digital assets within game universes could become truly useful and interesting. And it was surprising to me that the way they took off over the last few years was more about art and less of the utilitarian use cases. That was something I would not have predicted. But I think it's coming back towards the utility. I think that, there's a lot of hype now around GameFi and actually Web3 games and people building interesting games. And I think that is a representation of people moving towards more useful applications of NFTs. There's also been more and more crossover and experimentation between DeFi and NFTs. So, different ways to approach the NFTs. Like I've heard some of the last few months of the hype that like something like SudoSwap has gotten as people look at different models of, making markets and buying and selling NFTs. And I think that's important. And then there's also been other interesting use cases I've seen people explore with that are kind of a combination of DeFi and NFTs. So what I see is NFTs, just like the rest of the industry, will trend towards actual useful projects and utilities, at least in the bear market. As soon as any bull market comes about again, if the macro economy changes in a significant way, or if the merge pushes something like that back towards a bull market, we'll see. I think you will see, the hype cycles will start again. There'll be a bunch of garbage again. But during the bear, what people are actually building, what people in the industry are actually willing to fund are things that have some long-term trajectory of utility, or at least that's what I would look at and what I would hope for. So I think you'll see more and more of that. And I think NFTs will, kind of leave their hype cycle and enter their useful cycle over the next 2 or 3 years. And what comes from that, I don't know. I think that, the universe of useful things that can be built on NFTs is very vast, and there will be a number of different verticals that will be interesting. But what gets popular, I'm not sure. Outside of games, which I'm pretty confident in that combination with DeFi, I'm not sure which verticals are necessarily going to be strong or take off. And, again, I never would have predicted that art, would have gone so crazy in the NFT world 2 years ago. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that next thing will look like, but I'm sure there will be a couple of verticals very similar to that do take off in this next cycle.
That's really interesting. And it brings me back to what you'd said originally about the crypto market with DeFi and how the usefulness of DeFi kicked things off again. I do see the same thing happening with NFTs. For me, NFTs are extremely exciting. I didn't see it coming from an art perspective. I can understand why, but I did expect it to be for other reasons. What I think is amazing about NFTs is it actually gives people a way to be able to offer a completely different experience to anything else that's out there through a fair medium as well. So, for example, you know, you've only got to look at all the top social media platforms on the planet, and I'm not going to name any and I'm not going to shame any, but the fact of the matter is there are rules and regulations that, and a lot of hoops that need to be jumped through. And with NFTs, you can completely move yourself away from that, and your true fans or people that you interact with, it gives you a way to be able to have an experience with them that they normally wouldn't be able to have with you for a number of different reasons. I mean, it was amazing to me going into Decentraland and the Sandbox and seeing Justin Bieber doing a live show and then having an after party where he got to speak to certain people that are all over the world that that those people normally wouldn't be able to have that interaction with him. Now, what obviously it is in real time, but it's not in front of their face in reality. But it's the fact that they know what his voice is, and it's only those diehard fans that chose to buy a specific NFT that allowed that to take place. And I think from a community perspective, that's really important too, because look, you can do it with any community. Look at the football fan tokens and how they've taken off. The utility aspect of what NFTs can provide is mind-blowing to me. And I think that most businesses later down the line will have some sort of offering from an NFT perspective, because I just think that it's too good to offer, and provided the right type of cryptocurrency is used and the fees aren't too much, I can't see why it would be an issue. There's a lot of confusion, obviously, with a lot of the people that I talk to that are new to the space, because obviously that's what I do. I teach people and sort of hold their hand through from the very beginning. But what's really important for me is people understand sort of what the bigger picture can look like for this space. So yes, there are opportunities to make a lot of money with crypto investing, but you're not just coming into this space purely for that reason. You want to be coming in for a reason for finding projects and communities that you can truly get behind and actually use. That utility to me is so important, because if you're buying crypto but you don't use it, or you buy sand for the sandbox but you've never played the sandbox game before, it's like, I believe you should understand anything that you're invested into to some degree. And I think that will help with the adoption. It will help with how much people care about the space. But out of any community I've ever been in, this one has excited me the most, for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that there is a ton of potential on the utility of NFTs, and that they will become increasingly useful and more interesting types of digital assets. Our thesis originally at Shapeshift, when we first built Shapeshift, was simply that increasingly everything is going to be put online and digitized, and that will include assets, and that basically every type of digital asset under the sun will eventually exist, and that people will want to be able to move between them, trade them, buy them, sell them, whatever. And that has become increasingly true, especially since 2017 and the ICO boom. We started that, and NFTs are really, basically we started in crypto with this kind of financialization and tokenization of fungible assets, and now with NFTs, it's kind of everything else that could not be made fungible under the sun is getting put under the microscope in the NFT universe, and people are trying to explore what works and what doesn't. And so, to your point, one of the things I always have told people, or have experienced myself, even since the early days of Bitcoin, back when there wasn't too many options and choices, in order to teach people about Bitcoin, my recommendation was always that people should just use it. That, I could give you a long spiel about its usefulness, and about the way money works, and about the way blockchain mining works, and the Byzantine generals problem, and all these theoretical things that people might find interesting, but mostly didn't care about. But the thing that transformed people, or the thing that really got people to understand, was simply when, in the early days, you sent them a little Bitcoin and you got them to send it back, and you got them to try using it. It's the magic of using these things that gives about a bit of understanding. And that hasn't changed today. It's just, there's a lot more things to try and use now than there was, 10 years ago. But it's still the
Yeah.
same thing, to your point of like, if you're not going to spend the time to actually try using any of these applications or see what makes that asset that you're interested in useful or what you can do with your NFT, you're never really going to, you're going to have a gap in your understanding that you won't otherwise get. And it'll be much harder to get other people into the space other than just speculators, because that is where that is the base, the fundamentals of these things is what can you actually do with them, what can they actually add to your life, what is the usefulness of these things. So that's always the way that I've directed people when I'm talking to new people getting into the space, is just like, try these things, put aside a little money that you don't care about losing, a couple $100, and go try a bunch of these applications, try buying these assets, try selling them, try swapping them, try using them on their native platforms if you're, playing in a game like Sand or whatever that is. But just use the things. That's where most of the understanding comes from. It's experiential, not theoretical. And that's something I think people from the
100%.
outside have it takes them a bit longer to understand when they're coming from the outside of the space. Is like, technology in general is experiential, but I think people are used to just being able to research to understand things. And just, there's so much about crypto that you have to experience to really get. So that, to me, that is definitely the best way to bring new people into the space. And it's one of the most important aspects, even in my own learning. When I read about, some new DeFi protocol or some NFT app on Twitter, I don't really think I understand much about it, even if I've read about it, until I've actually taken the time to try to open up the application, use it, and see what it can do. And that's where I get a lot of my own learnings from. So, you can spend a couple $100, using various applications in the space, and you will get much more of a wealth of knowledge than spending, a year, just listening to podcasts or researching. Not to put down the usefulness of those things. I love those things. I'm a rabid researcher and listener myself. But I get so much more out of just using these things, even if it costs me a little bit of money.
You're right. You're 100% right. While you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, what is the most simple way that I could try and put this across to someone that's watching, that's new and doesn't know and hasn't tried this out yet? To me, it's like spending a year learning to drive without actually getting in the car versus getting in the car and learning to drive. It's like you can read everything, you can watch videos about everything, but once you get in the car and turn it on, the whole feeling and everything about it changes because you're actually doing it now. It's like, that's the difference. And that's when the penny drop moment happens, in my opinion. And that's all people need to do. It's like, we can talk about any project that you want. We can talk about Solana, okay? And we can talk about all the breakdowns that it's had. And we can talk about how fast it is and how cheap it is to transact. And we can look at different projects that are built upon it. And we can look at the smartphone they're building. And we can look at all sorts of different things. But if you actually just go and buy some Solana and then send it from one place to another, or spend it and buy something at your local shop by using a crypto debit card, for example, it all makes sense. Because if you do it with Bitcoin and then you do it with Ethereum and then you do it with Solana, you realize the speed differences between the three automatically. You understand the fees that are associated. And if you go off and try out some of these different applications that are built on these blockchains, like Step-In, for example, you start understanding how big this whole thing is actually going to be and how big it already is. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. It really is the difference between, studying and learning about how a car works versus actually driving one. There's
Exactly.
there's never a replacement for that experience, and that's very true in crypto itself. And the people that I have seen, really get it and fall the most down the rabbit hole are those who have actually tried the things and don't just enter as part of a speculative bubble and then get bored when the speculative opportunity is gone. it's those who realize, oh, I can actually do useful things with this. There's actually a really cool aspect to this. There's a magic to it. Especially in the early days, that magic of sending, even just a little bit of Bitcoin from here to there was so incredible. And to me, the first time I've really felt that magic, since the early days of Bitcoin was with Ethereum and DeFi. The first time I took a crypto loan out with a couple of clicks and put my collateral up and didn't have to ask anyone's permission, and see how that all worked. That magic was really there. And I'm sure it's, I'm not as big into the NFT world, but I'm sure it's very similar for those who get into the NFT world and just feel the magic of actually, owning this digital asset in a way that they couldn't have before and what they can do with it. So yeah, definitely agree with you there.
Perfect. And I think lastly as well, John, the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is the market at the moment. Obviously, since what the last 8 months, we've been in, a bit of a bear market. We've had a steady decline. The Ethereum merge as people are saying that Ethereum's been driving the market, and the Ethereum merge has been driving the market for this recent kind of upwards trajectory that we've seen since that 17,600 bottom. But what I do want to do is just talk about where you think we are currently in the cycle. Are we in a similar cycle to anything we've seen before, or do you have different outlooks on the fact that we're in a completely different cycle to anything we've seen before? I just want to get a feel for where you think we are and where we're likely to go to. I'm not asking for price predictions. I'm just looking for your feeling of where we are, someone that's very experienced in the space.
Yeah. So yeah, without throwing out all the various caveats about the fact that I ultimately have no idea in any short enough time frame about where the market is going, and if I did, I would definitely use that to make a lot more money than I currently have. But I have seen a number of these cycles over the last 10 years, and we have entered in and out of them in crypto. And there is definitely always been this kind of cyclical nature to crypto. And we definitely seem to be in, I wouldn't say the depths of, but we've been steadily declining into a bear market since basically the beginning of 2022. And I think what's interesting about this particular cycle is, unlike the last crypto cycles where it was pretty, I'm not going to say predictable, but if you look back on it, there was always this kind of hype cycle, and then there's mania, and then a blow off top, and then everything declining from there with the narratives changing. We never really had the blow off top in this last bull market. In fact, in some ways, if you compare it to the previous crypto bull markets, it was kind of lame as far as bull markets go. The heights that we reached just weren't that crazy. And I think part of it is, I think that the cycle got cut short by just basically the macro situation, the macroeconomic things outside of crypto. And it's the first time in 10 years of crypto that I've seen macro have such a big impact. And this is both good and bad. It's bad in the sense that we have to realize as an industry that we are now big enough to be tied to the rest of the world economy, and that we are not, we're not living in our own little bubble anymore. And it's also a good thing in that way. I mean, that's part of the growth of crypto, is that it's become big and important enough to be part of all these things and to be so directly affected. But I do think that this recent crypto decline has very little, from my perspective, to do with crypto itself. Certainly there's been particular events and particular impacts that have impacted crypto much more directly, or in our own little world, especially things like the Terra Luna blow up, and how connected that had become. And like those things. But the general decline was, I'm not sure those things would have even happened without the macro situation. And it's the first time I've seen crypto so connected to the macro situation. So it's really hard to divorce, in my opinion, any perspective of the crypto markets today from just what's going on with the world economy, and then we got all sorts of, bad news this year, like the war in Ukraine and the continual disruption from COVID of the supply lines, and all these things that have led to massive inflation, and then not that to anyone paying attention in crypto, the inflation was a surprise with all the money printing, but the reaction to it by all the world's governments, and particularly the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve, has been to get very aggressive, at least trying to look like they're trying to fight inflation, and that has, made capital much more expensive, and that has brought down all risk assets, basically. Not just crypto, but obviously equities and every risk asset under the sun has been hurting. The housing markets are all starting to feel it now too, as mortgages get more expensive.
Oh yeah.
There's just what I see is one big connected macro economy. And I think that's been the biggest effect on crypto in this bear market. And so in some ways it's a harder, normally I would say historically, just what we've seen in these cycles, what I myself have experienced, is we would normally see something like, anywhere from 18, a couple of years, maybe 2 to 3 years most, of a kind of bear market cycle for crypto, and then we would come out of it. It's hard to predict if that's going to be slower or faster or around the same time, because it has so much to do with the macro effect. I'm still very, long-term bullish on crypto. Nothing's changed my thesis there. And if anything, all these things have just made me more bullish. But in the short term, that's not good for any of these risk assets. And crypto is among the riskiest of risk assets. So we have felt it, even more so than all the other markets. And I just don't know what's going to reverse that until we see these macro effects start to loosen some. We see the federal, things like the Federal Reserve stop raising rates, at least, maybe not cutting rates, but at least stop raising rates. I think the markets will pivot really fast as soon as they get a sense that those things are really changing. But
for sure,
in lieu of that, I think we'll see, some local, relief rallies and pumps, but it's really hard to bet on anything moving significantly upwards until the macro environment changes. And that's really the first time we've seen that in crypto. So I do think in some ways, it's always the trope of this time it's different. And a lot of times it's not, but this time there is major differences just in how much crypto is connected to the macro. And I just think macro is still driving things. At some point that might decouple a little bit, but I don't see it happening anytime soon. I do think the one major thing or catalyst that might change some of that in crypto is the Ethereum merge. I don't believe the Ethereum merge and how big of a deal it is properly priced in yet, and I'm not sure it can be priced in because of how different just the flows of the Ethereum economy will be post-merge. I mean, we're only sitting here, a few days away from the merge, and Ethereum's still sub $2,000. And to me, that looks like a kind of buying opportunity of a lifetime. Not to make again any any pronouncements about where that price is going or should be, but I do think that it's such a significant change to the second largest crypto economy, and arguably today the most important one in terms of actual innovation and applications you can use. And
for sure,
there's just going to be such a different change to the supply mechanics. I don't see how that can't have a large effect. Now, the question is going to be, how much can that bolster Ethereum in the crypto world in the headwinds of all this macro problems? And I don't know, to be honest. It could be that Ethereum becomes like the gold standard yield asset, post merge. And that really develops, and that could drive, outsized returns even during what is otherwise a bearish world economy. Or it could be that, the effects start to be felt, but we don't really see that reflected in price until something in the macro changes. And I'm not sure which one of those it is. And we're just going to have to see, because we just, if this was happening in any sort of more friendly macro environment, I think it would be insanely bullish. But the headwinds are just so strong that I just don't know if all that extra money is going to necessarily flow back into crypto anytime soon. I'm not sure.
I'm with you. It's truly a joy to have you on here and saying the things that you're saying as well, because to me it's just like hearing an echo. I've got exactly the same outlook. The only thing that I would say personally is I don't think it's important at this stage whether the bottom is in or not. And I believe that people that are already invested in different crypto projects that have got utility and are likely to grow in adoption and value, you know, this is just a waiting game. And like you said, for me, it's just waiting for the Fed to make a few changes. And it's probably going to get worse before it gets better, but it's going to be worth it in the long run. And I believe that Ethereum is one of the most undervalued assets on the planet right now. And it's not just because we're in a bit of a bear market and it's cheap. And, you know, we can sit there and say whatever price we want to that it could potentially get to, but this Ethereum merge, even when you put the Ethereum merge to one side, like you said, it's the amount of applications, it's the amount of people that build upon it. It's the fact that if this is successful and the fees are reduced, that's where people will probably continue to build more so than anywhere else, any other blockchain on the planet. And what Ethereum's capable of doing in comparison to any of its major competitors, it's already way ahead of most in terms of its market capitalization, in terms of its partnerships, its network. Yeah, of course, they've got competitors and they've got, you know, layer two scaling solutions and all that kind of thing. But I just think that Ethereum is the one to beat, but it just doesn't seem apparent right now at the moment. I think it's got an amazing future ahead of it.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. And yeah, what's going to be interesting post merge is that so much of the Ethereum economy and supply will just depend on the usage of the ecosystem. You know, when the supply basically issuance is, you know, pretty close to or slightly less than net neutral, any significant increase in, you know, even just above the low bear market trends we have right now, but certainly bigger than any other crypto ecosystem today, will drive that much more burning of ETH and will drive that much more of a supply crunch post merge. And so that flow is going to be very interesting to watch. And I do think it will create, you know, Ethereum already has that network effect. It's already the place where the majority, you know, at least a plurality of interesting crypto applications are built and used. And I don't see that changing. I see that only accelerating. And I don't know how you can be if you're looking long term, I don't see how you can be anything but bullish on Ethereum at this point. Now, of course, there's always a bunch of things that could go wrong there. You know, the merge itself is not a guarantee. As much work is done into this, as long as it's taken, there is no guarantee that, you know, we don't hit some terrible edge case bug or something when the merge actually occurs this week. Hopefully that's not the case, but even if it does, I mean, I think they'll get past it. I've watched this, you know, the Ethereum community long enough since its genesis to know that I do think that they will eventually deliver on that, even if it takes longer than people want. But you know, there's no free lunch. We will have to see. But I don't see another trend long term. I don't see this going anywhere but more usage and more things being built and more interesting, and you know, the plethora of L2s out there and other things. It's just that ecosystem has just become, you know, so strong. And even with all the L1 competitors, I just don't really see any of them unseating Ethereum anytime soon. Some of them will go stronger. There are some ecosystems I'm still bullish on, you know, outside of Ethereum and Bitcoin certainly, but I don't see any of those leading the charge anytime in the next few years.
Yeah, I think when you look at how long Bitcoin and Ethereum have been around, it's like, you know, people refer to Bitcoin as the king. It's got the largest market capitalization. You know, when Bitcoin moves, other things move. Ethereum's got a nice chunk of that whole market capitalization itself, and it to me is only going to continue to grow. I think that because Bitcoin and Ethereum are so different, there's almost like they complement each other to an extent. I don't think it's like you have to have one or the other, or one will win and one will lose. I think that there's definitely a place for both of them, as well as a lot of other projects that provide different types of solutions with their utility. But it's going to be interesting. The next few years are going to be, for me, quite exciting. I've kind of looked at, you know, people talking about the flippening with Ethereum and Bitcoin. I'm actually more interested in who could potentially have that flippening effect on Ethereum. But like you say, this isn't anything that's going to happen, you know, overnight. This is years away. But I'm just, you know, sat back with the popcorn, ready to watch how it all plays out, because I think it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, clearly, you know, this week and over the next, let's call it 6 months, the most important thing to watch in crypto is just how does the merge work and what are its after effects? You know, what does the market tend to do on that? What do developers do when they see this merge? Does this cause some who are building on other L1s to, you know, focus more on Ethereum? Does it just cause all of the ecosystems to grow? You know, kind of, the rising water is lifting all boats type of phenomenon. Or does it really just benefit the Ethereum ecosystem exclusively? I don't really see that. That's not really how crypto works generally, but it could be. And just seeing what, you know, how things play out over the next 6 months will be very informative. I mean, that's a kind of tautology and truism. It's like, you know, we'll always know more 6 months from now when there's more information out there. But it seems particularly true. It's hard to understate how important the merge is and how long it's, you know, basically Ethereum's been working on this since Ethereum was launched. You know, we're going on nearly something like, you know, 7 or 8 years of them building and doing research and trying to get something like the merge actually production ready. So it's just, it's such a big deal, and we'll have to see how it plays out. I'm definitely excited to see it finally happen. But what its effects will be like, we don't know. I think similar to how, you know, it's hard for me to tell if this is going to be a, you know, sell the news type event where we actually see downward pressure on Ethereum post-merge, at least in the short term. That wouldn't surprise me. But I don't think that would last that long. I just think that it's going to be too bullish long term if this works, and that will play out. But maybe similar to what we've seen in Bitcoin halvings over the years, the price effect can often lag, sometimes even 6 to 12 months from these supply crunches. So there's no guarantee that we'll see any sort of short-term, you know, bullish rise, especially in the macro headwinds. But I don't see how that doesn't turn bullish over enough time.
For sure. Well, John, absolute pleasure to have you on, my friend, and I would definitely like to have you on again. You're a wealth of knowledge, and yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed talking to you today. It's great to get your perspective on things, and if you'd like to, I'm more than happy to bring you on another time, and we'll chat again about more crypto things. In fact, I think that you should be coming back on for us to discuss how the Ethereum merge went and what those after effects were actually like. I think that would be interesting to look at what the reasons were as to what's happened. You know, perhaps in, I don't know, if you want to do something in a few weeks' time, and then perhaps in a few months' time, and look at the differences.
Sure. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, no, this was a great conversation. I'm happy to come back on and look at the merge and its after effects in a couple weeks or a month or something, and see how things are going.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, thanks again for joining us, John, and everyone that has watched this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with anyone that you think that would find it useful. And we will catch up with you guys next time. John, thanks again for your time today. Really appreciate it. Speak to you soon.
So saying absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.